Okay, good morning, everyone. Um, Usually when you give a presentation, the normal thing is just asking for if I'm speaking too fast. But if I'm speaking too fast, you had too much to drink yesterday, so that's your fault, okay? So try and keep up. It's really interesting when you go to different conferences and you have the different parties and all that. And yesterday at the networking party, I was, you saw a lot of people, you were talking to them, and then I see someone trying to wave and get my attention on the side, and you want to be nice and social and polite. So I, nod and smile and wave back. And then I realized it was a piece of cardboard. Uh, so, better go for it, right? But better at least give it a try. Um, there are a few things, like it's my second time in Latvia, the first time in Riga. There are a few things I need to ask about. What's this? Is this art? Because we need to talk about this. And your sense of humor is also something we need to dig deep into here. So let's talk later, okay? Let's talk after this presentation. And also when giving presentation to sort of be mobile, you want to have a remote control. And the interesting thing is if you go into Amazon, I needed to get a new remote, is that they also show you that frequently bought together, and apparently the thing that people buy together is a clown horn with remote controls. I don't know what kind of presentations you go to, but I'm hard, changing slides and well, we'll see. And also, what's good to know, I'm Swedish, with sort of everything that comes with it. And it also sort of means that, probably similar to what I see a lot here, that people have a lot of feelings, but they don't show them on the outside, like that they're on fire on the inside. But on the outside, it's like, yeah, okay. So if I seem a bit calm up here, I'm really passionate on the inside, and that's sort of how we work, right? Don't don't express too many feelings publicly. So what I do, I work at this small startup in Mountain View called Google. And what I do at Google is that I work with developer relations. So for the Nordics region, basically every country that's cold and dark all the time is where I work with every different product that Google does for developers. So we're talking about the cloud platform, we're talking about Android, Chrome, YouTube APIs, maps, etc. And basically just trying to help developers to get things done. And Google is a really, really big company. So usually I meet a lot of people and I sort of become the funnel to try to figure out what people are doing and how we can best sort of help them. And that's what I do in the Nordics. Then I also globally work with different community work, and we're having, with organizers here, we're having Google developer groups all over the world. I think it's up to 700 or something now, with people just trying to talk about technology and try out different things. And also working with different developer feedback to meet developers and figuring out with our products how can we make them better and easier to use. And you might also have heard that Google have this 20% thing, which is kind of relative. It depends on which team you're on and what you're doing. For me, it has become virtual reality. So I'm working together with the VR team in Europe and just trying to sort of figure out the next steps and the new games and the new experiences and all that. So basically, all I do, apparently, is talk a lot with a lot of different people. And generally, the things that we're doing with the developers are naturally Android, but also for iOS as well. I mean, it kind of makes sense that iOS is a really big platform. We have really big apps and services. Of course, they need to work just as well on iOS as well. And then, of course, the web. And these are generally the most common products that I work with. I also have a blog on Medium where I usually write about the different things that sort of comes up at Google. So it's not necessarily sort of in-depth technical, but generally I'm sort of biased here, of course, because I'm writing it. But generally a fairly good overview, just different things that we announced or released or working on as well. And of course, another part in a role like mine is staying atop of trends to figure out what people want and what people don't want. Poor you two. Actually, never been a fan, so I don't care that much. But it's just interesting to see what people get upset about as well. Generally today, what I will try and cover, and why you're here as well, is talking about the web as a whole. Where it is today, the normal sort of big fight, web versus native, different tools and resources that we have at Google, what Slice actually is and how you work with that, and the sort of most common things where developers ask or believe that they need a native app, monetization, and then of course also the future of the web. And looking at the web as of today, it's being sort of mixed together by so many different things. It's kind of like a freak show. I have to say it's pretty clever though, but weird, right? But this is sort of how I see the web. Like you take any sort of part that you can find and you put it together and then shit works and it's fantastic. And for some people it's really scary, but I think it's also sort of the beauty of it. You never know what's going to come out of it, but you can just combine pretty much everything. There was a certain mindset on the web as well for a while. The way it turned out, of course the study was fake, but it made, with news, first they put something out there and then they figure out if it's actually true or not. But I think one point that I want to make is we need to sort of get away from this kind of mindset as well, right? I mean, fighting between different web browsers is just silly. I think it's way more important to make sure that the web actually works well and it's available for everyone, rather than figuring out your favorite browser or something like that. So naturally coming from the Google angle, and one thing I want to talk about, if you look at Chrome right now, it's just one of many browsers, right? Chrome has 1 billion active users right now. And still, when I meet a lot of companies and I meet a lot of different startups, usually, you would ask them, so are you building a website? So no, initially we're targeting mobile devices. And it kind of annoys me, because if you look at the number of users on web, on mobile, it's billions of people. And I really, really want to stress that point, that the web is not just a big desktop browser or when you have your 2 screens or something like that. It's all over mobile. We actually see most of the users on mobile right now. I mean, if you look at Chrome alone, Chrome on mobile has 800 million users. And that's one out of 4 or 5 major browsers. So the web is highly relevant on sort of all kinds of platforms. There's been a certain mindset recently that it's only native, which is not true. It's also very different between different parts of the world. Seeing, comparing, for instance, Western Europe versus India or Indonesia, where the web is massive and their sort of only way of reaching everyone. But of course, and as I said before, the web is way more than Chrome, right? And from the Google angle, we're working together with Mozilla and Microsoft with Edge, that has become quite good, Opera, and then, well, there's one more player, trying to make sure that we agree on everything and have proper standards for that. And also working at Google, one thing that's really interesting is looking at the numbers and sort of back to the trends again. And if we look at the web on mobile right now, according to statistics, the number or the amount of traffic from mobiles is twice as high through the web than native apps. So basically twice as many people using the web. Then of course, if you start looking at sort of the web versus native, I think we sort of need to get away from a fight. It's always sort of the press thing, that one thing has to beat the other. It sort of becomes like Highlander where technologies are fighting with swords, and that's not really true. I mean, you're going to have lots of different technologies, and a number of them is going to be good for different use cases. It's not just going to be one technology to rule them all, or one platform to rule them all. And looking at some of the major websites, this is US-based, but in general, just seeing that it's a fairly interesting and good mix with how many people actually accessing the content through the app or through the browser as well. But then, of course, as with studies and statistics, there's always going to be something showing other things, right? So Comscore had this report that for mobile users, 87% of their time, not necessarily traffic, is being spent in native apps on mobile. And in the last 3 years, that has gone up 90%. But the web at the same time has only sort of grown 53%. So basically, people spend a lot more time in native apps. And according to Flurry and some other studies, they have it even down to 10% of your time being spent in the mobile browser. So it's basically just a small sort of sliver on when you're actually using usually your mobile phone, sometimes tablet. And also looking at what people are doing, naturally, Facebook and social is a really big thing or big part of that as well. So the question, of course, is, okay, but if it's twice as much traffic on the web rather than native apps, but you spend 90-ish% of your time in native apps, what does it mean? What's the conclusion that we can draw from here? The consistency that we see here, and especially with some brands who build a really deep long-term engagement with their users, they have that through native apps. So I think it's also based on what kind of native apps you've been building, but also how people use them as well. And also in some cases where the web needs to catch up on mobile and become better. But I think it's not necessarily, one beats the other. You just see different user behavior. And I'll talk about that a bit later, but it's generally, what do you want to do? Do you just want to go in and check something, or is it a game that you play for hours and hours, or how do you want to interact with it? And another part, especially when people talk about mobile, is like people are only playing games, right? It's interesting to see that the gaming trend is actually going down. Of course, people still play games, and coming from the country with Candy Crush, it's part of our DNA. We have to play games to support them. But it's interesting to see that gaming is actually going down, that social and messaging in general, and then also entertainment to some kind, is really, really growing as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see in a couple of years if it's sort of even out, or if gaming becomes less and less relevant, if it sort of goes back to consoles or something like that. And if we look at the number of users out there, if we look at Facebook, for instance, Facebook right now, per day has 1 billion plus daily users, and 844 million of them are on mobile. So it's very, very mobile driven. We have a few products with 1 billion users as well. But the interesting part here is, of course, 1 billion, that sounds like a crazy lot, right? But the interesting is not that much, like it's a lot of people, of course. But it's still, we're seeing a number of apps, and also in China having 1 billion users. It's interesting to see the trend now, that a number of apps with a lot of users, they sort of want to become some kind of version of the next browser for users. So it's not just you go into the app and you do one thing, but they're building in more and more features. So some apps that had some content to begin with, then they start with having friends and messaging, etc., etc., etc. In some cases it works, in some cases it's terrible, but everyone sort of want to own the user as much as possible. And that makes it hard for web developers when you have things in different web pages all the time. I don't know if you have kids, but like a Lego firewalk thing, I would rather walk on fire than this. It hurts a lot. So a few things that we've been trying to do to make sure that the web is sort of useful and relevant as well. Like if you've been using, especially on the mobile web, when you go into a web page, and then as soon as you get in, you get this big pop-up showing, or actually telling you as a user, no, you're doing this wrong, don't visit our website. We have a shiny native app that we invested a shitload of money into, so now you have to use that because I need to show that number to my manager. That kind of thing. So we started looking and these sort of interstitials, as they're being called, that we don't figure them to be mobile friendly. So when it comes to search engine ranking right now, and if you're having these interstitials, it's going to punish you in your ranking, right? So if you have a website, a mobile website, that only becomes a pop-up, not very good for you. And it's sort of in line with the annoying thing, right? When you go into a website as well, and you get this, do you want to fill out a survey? What do you think about this website? I don't know. I haven't even seen the website yet. I'm being here 2.5 seconds, right? So the focus always needs to be on the user to make sure that they can actually see something and use it rather than initially being told they're doing wrong or pointing them elsewhere. We have a mobile-friendly test, which is also sort of a good pointer. So you can just put in a URL and then we access that page and you get a few advice how to make it better or things to fix. And as we saw before, and we also did a survey to trying to figure out what people actually want from, whether it's the web or a native app. But generally, the most things that people talk about when it comes to messaging is they want to have photos, they want to have notifications, any kind of different chats, and then sort of goes down to offline and payments and stuff like that. And one thing that we're working on and trying to make sure that it works on as many platforms as possible is through Google Hangouts. So Google Hangouts used to be a part of Google Plus, which was a big thing, I guess. This is being recorded, right? I need to choose my words. But now, same as with Google Photos, Google Plus has become this standalone product right now, which of course means that we can do more things on the side with it. And the interesting part here is that you have, if you go to hangouts.google.com, you have it, you can use it in the web browser any way you want to, but you also have installable apps on iOS and Android and other platforms. But the interesting part, I think, about Google Hangouts that is it's all being based on open technologies. It's all being based on WebRTC. So most of the WebRTC work in general, and WebRTC, it's open standards, right? Most of it is actually being done in Stockholm, and also some of it is being part in Seattle, actually south of Seattle, in a town called Kirkland. And the interesting part when you work with an open standard is that we have one video team, one audio team, one integrations team, etc. Is that they also create all of these open libraries. Like, so if you use Facebook Messenger on iOS or Snapchat or something like that, you're actually using WebRTC that's being built generally by Google. And that's the nice part, right? So I think it's so important to sort of stress the point that we're not necessarily competing on trying to own the code itself. You should rather compete on features or implementations or user experience than trying to close off everything else. And looking at WebRTC support right now, it's in Microsoft Edge and in the form of ORTC, which is basically more or less WebRTC 2.0. And it's been in Chrome and Firefox for a long time, and Opera as well, and in Android across the browsers as well, and also in different sort of peripheral OSs like Chrome OS and Firefox OS. Another thing we have is the Chrome DevTools. We have a little portal we can also go through, and you can get sort of digests and updates about new features and similar. And one more thing that I want to talk about is web fundamentals, because when I started with the web a long time ago, it wasn't that hard. I mean, web pages, they were just sort of gray background. You would put an HR element in the middle, and then you had sections. And then eventually we got to the point of having mouse over effects with images, and it was amazing. It's slightly more complicated today. And I think that's also, it's the good part, but it's also the scary part with people coming to the web. Like, I've known the web for a long time, but you see new developers or newly graduated or similar coming to coding, and they look at it, it's like, it seems pretty hard. I'd rather just pick this platform or that platform. It could be iOS or Android, for instance, and only know my thing. So I think one thing that we're working on is web fundamentals, just to sort of explain and then show to people, giving them boilerplate code and also general setups and tutorials, but basically just what are the common best practices on the web? How can I actually make it easier for you to get started? It doesn't have to be terrible, right? But I think it's just the same thing as reading news. I mean, you're going to have all kinds of news, and depending on which political interest that news outlet has, it's either going to be terrible or really interesting. So I think the same thing with this. You have lots of information, but we're just trying to distill the good information for you about this. And then if you have native apps, but you have part of your content that you want to be web content, and you're probably using web views or similar. Something that we shipped in the last version of Android was Chrome custom tabs. And basically with Chrome custom tabs, it rather becomes this instance of Chrome than a completely separate dumb web view. So you can sort of reuse things that you already have in Chrome. And a number of extra things as well is that you have a nice way of being able to customize how it looks and feels within your app, so it still feels like your app. But it also means that we can pre-start Chrome and we can pre-fetch content, which of course, if you look at Apple and Facebook, for instance, with their different news initiatives and articles, it has to be instant. It has to be really, really fast, and it has to be good for you as a user. So if you're having web content, and if you're having an app on Android, I'd recommend looking at Chrome custom tabs, because it just makes it sort of easier and more fluid within your app. So let's talk about Slice. And Slice, as sort of any acronym, it's been based by the work on many people and a number of my colleagues. So Paul Kinlan, Jake, Alex, Paul Lewis, etc. And it's basically just trying out to find a good description of what the web should be like for you as a developers, but also for users as well. And basically the idea is to some point getting away from the mandatory app install thing of going to the App Store for whatever platform, finding the app, etc., etc. You just want to go to a URL, see the content, use it, and then you're done, right? And I think that's sort of still the beauty of the web. It's so easy with just having a URL and not necessarily having a dependency where you have to install apps that you're only going to use one time. Like if I install the app of every conference I go to, I would have like 400 apps that I would never ever use again, right? But I mean, yesterday and today, the schedule is really, really important to me, but then it's over. So I think with talking about Slice in these web apps, it's just making sure that we have content that's instant and just available, right? With as little problems for the users as possible. And of course, fast, rich experience, etc. So looking at the S in Slice, it's just making sure that we have things that's secure. And it, of course, is one of the most important things. It's just making sure we have all the different domains sandboxed, and also sandboxed away from the user's machine and from each other. And another thing that's also really interesting, of course, is how you work with permission models. And then what we're moving more and more into is asking the user for access to something when you actually need it. I mean, the worst sort of app installs is I want to install this app right now, and then you get 15 pages of I want to access this on your mobile phone. And it's like, no, shit, no. Why do you want that? So it's more and more going in the direction of just asking the user, like, when you actually click this button, it seems you need to figure out where you are so we can show where you're on the map. Is that okay? Okay, fine. And with being linkable, of course, means that you can point to anywhere on the web. You can just find content, you have a direct link, and then you can point people there. And for instance, like with Medium and then the blogging platform, what they started doing was that for each paragraph in every blog post that they have, it also has an anchor link. So it's not just the way it used to be, like, go to this page, and if you're lucky, you're going to find what I mean, right? Now you can actually say it right down here, 3.5 pages down, this word, this is what I want you to look at, to be as clear as possible. And then, of course, being indexable. I'm still sort of amazed that you can open any search engine and you write in something that you're interested in and you actually find relevant content, or well, most of the time. And that's really cool, right? Like growing up and having these dictionaries when you were doing schoolwork, like this is a dictionary for the letter A and B. Oh no, it's taken in the library, so I have to wait for 2 hours, then I can read up about, anything. So I think the important part here is like, it's all there and we can index all of that content. It's also composable, and sort of back to the horse and the Barbie head and all that. It's also that you can take any parts and combine them together, right? Whether that's nice, interesting modular approaches, or whether that's through having iframes, third-party JavaScript, etc. But just making sure that whatever you have, all the different modules and building blocks, you can just put them together and create something. And it's getting to be a bigger and bigger push if you look at web components. Just having components that are as standalone as possible, just making sure that you can just take parts you need and you can reuse them in any other part that you want. The last part, the fancy word, ephemeral, which is just a nice way of saying that it's temporary, like it's right now and it just goes away. It comes back to the part of just putting in a URL, finding the content that you want, and then you're done, right? So it's sort of the opposite to being installable. Sure, you can use technologies like service workers to make sure that things are offline, etc. But in general, in most cases, you just want to find info, interact with it, and then you're done, right? And I think we've gotten to kind of a ridiculous place when you have instructions like this. So basically, you have Shiver's QR codes, and then you have a long list or of instructions like if you do all of these and you install it, then step 500, you have the app, amazing. Or you could go to this URL. So where did we go wrong? Why did we start asking this from our users, right? Like if you go to the URL for this specific thing, you have the content. This seems to work pretty well for me. I mean, basically all they do, and in a good manner, but still, you do a search, you find something, that's it, right? There's no need to necessarily have to push an app and the entire process for that for a user. So basically, don't make your users feel like this. So if you look at some surveys and try to investigate, if you ask developers, okay, so you're building a native app, okay, why are you building a native app? What are the most common things that developers ask for when they choose to go native instead of using web stuff? And overall, they talk about performance, offline access, being able to process things in the background, and that's kind of a tricky thing between platforms, between, let's say, iOS and Android, how much things you can actually run in the background. Well, also notifications, different sensors and stuff, anything from geolocation to gyro to other things. And then the last part is OS specific features. On iOS, it could be a certain look and feel. And on Android, for instance, with intents, we've seen that people ask a lot for having intents on the web as well. So I'm going to talk about 3 of these here and what the web has right now. I mean, if we look at performance, for instance, first, it's getting better and better. Like, I mean, that's not the thing that I'm worried about. It's just best practices combined with making web browsers better and better, right? And with sensors and specific features, it's sort of coming. But I think these 3 with offline and processing in the background and notifications are really interesting. And when it comes to new web features, especially if you talk about offline, the big sort of savior now, and it's been worked on for a long time, and it's a lot of efforts going into it, is having service workers. So it's basically a feature to sort of intercept and handle network requests and just make sure that we can, through JavaScript, offer caching or what kind of responses we serve to the users. So the way it's built up, it's a JavaScript worker. So it's not part of the DOM directly. So instead, you can post messages to and from the service workers. And generally, it's just a network proxy. But it also means that with the service workers, that you can sort of spin them up when you need them, and then you throw away them when you're done. So in some cases, you want to keep them for a long time and be reusable. In some cases, it's just for that visit of the website. And then, as most new JavaScript libraries, it's going to be interesting to see the ECMAScript talk. I think that's after this. It's also seeing new features of ECMAScript, but also seeing promises. Like promises in JavaScript is being used in more or less every new API that comes out now. One thing that could be hard for people is that for service workers, we need HTTPS. And for some of you, it's like, of course, it has to be safe and proper and all of that. But for a lot of people, it's like, this is annoying because then you need to get your SSL certificate, etc. You need to get everything in order. So it could be hard, right? There are a number of services, so it's getting better and better. But I think at the same time, it's vital that we make sure that it's secure, because as the web is becoming more and more powerful, the worst thing that we can do to the web is having any kind of security risks for users. And looking at some code in general, it's fairly easy. You can just register a service worker. So you have a service worker JavaScript file, and you register it, and then you get a success or error callback from that. And within Chrome, it's also available in Firefox and in Opera right now. And within Chrome, you have two URLs that you can put into the browser, and you can go in. And this is kind of an interesting exercise. Like if you've been navigating anywhere on the web, you can go in and you see what kind of service workers do I have right now. So one of them is just giving you an overview, and the other part you can really sort of dive into what kind of content is it saving offline for me, and how can I sort of start digging and see what I actually have in there. And when you have the service workers, and then let's say you want to cache a number of resources at the first visit to your web page, because they're going to keep on seeing these resources for every page they go to afterwards. Basically, you just put in a number of URLs, and then you have the install event. And when you have the install event, what you do is basically you open a cache, you cache the different files, and then you just make sure to confirm if you cached all the different assets or not. So the way it looks with a bit more code is just basically you have all these different URLs, opening the cache, and then just adding all of them to it. And then the other part of just sort of fetching content, of course, is when you get different network requests, you can intercept all of these requests, and you can figure out, okay, have I already cached this? Do I want to serve the cache thing? Do I want to get something from online, etc.? So you have fairly, granular details of what to serve to the user. Then, of course, you have the interesting part where anything is offline, like how do you update something that's already there? And the way, if you have a service worker and you want to update it, is that you update your service worker JavaScript file, and then it gets started, you have an install event, and then it goes into kind of an interesting waiting state. And then when you have the waiting state, we can just see, okay, the user is actually using the web page right now. And then we can see that you already had the service worker in place, but as soon as the user sort of leaves those pages or closes them, then we can kill the old service worker and make sure to push out a new one. And then once the new one actually gets pushed out to the user, we have an activate event. So we know that, okay, now it's actually working, now it's in place. And one part with this, and sort of a mindset, probably more than a mindset than a technology, that we're trying to push is having kind of an application shell architecture. So if you look at most mobile web pages, most of the things that you see in most pages are recurring, right? You have the same content. So what you want to do with them is that you make sure that you cache them with a service worker. So anything that's sort of the sidebar, the header, etc. What are you going to have on every page? Okay, make sure that you have that so the user don't have to get the latency of network requests all the time, and then just make sure to load the new unique content for that page. And we've been trying a few different things just with this architecture, just seeing also coming down to the user experience. And I think it's, sometimes it's being faster, right? Sometimes it's the impression of being faster. Like if you see something, it gives you the impression that it's actually working and you have something. But if you have a completely white page for a long time, you have no idea if it's actually working or not. It's a normal thing, like on mobile phones, like it's white. Did I do anything wrong? Should I hold it higher? Should I go into flight mode and back again? Is it my fault? Should I get a new phone? So just show things as soon as possible to the user. The other part when it comes to background processing is having background sync. And we have an article on introducing background sync as well. But basically, it's just making sure that we can have things in the background, and then when we know that the user has a stable connectivity, then we can just throw all of the actions into place. And the way it is right now, we're having it in the dev versions and then the canary version. So you can go in there and you have flag, you can turn on background processing. So it's fairly early, but it's also interesting to just make sure that, as always with having things offline, that it's not sort of down to the user to make sure that they're always online, and if they get offline, it's their fault. But rather, like if you have the background sync, they lose connection, you can just keep it there and fix it for them when it got online again. And the third part is having notifications. So it's in Chrome, Firefox, and Opera, and you're having the push APIs and the notification APIs. And basically, it relies on having manifests for your web page. I'll get to that soon. And also having service workers. So it's sort of all connected here. And of course, especially on mobile devices, is one of the most interesting things, right? To just be able to give people notifications. You don't have to be in the web page in the app, but you get notified if something's happening. Like, so a quick question: who uses Facebook here? Anyone? No? Google Plus? So if you've seen recently, like I think in the last 2 months or something, if you use Facebook on a laptop or desktop browser, and you get notifications on Facebook, and you see a notification pop up in the corner, right? That's using the web push notification APIs. So we work together with Facebook to make sure that even if people aren't in the Facebook site right now or even in Chrome, they'll get a notification and know that it's actually worth going back in there again. And the way notifications work is basically just a long sort of flow chart and making sure that if we have service workers supported, if they're in the registration, what kind of permission we have, if they already have a subscription, etc. But sort of step by step, initially we can just make sure to show, check if they support to show notifications. That's step one. Then we can see, have we asked them for permission before? Because you don't want to annoy your user. Like if you ask them once, can we push stuff to you? And they go, no, hell no, don't do that. You don't want to keep on asking, right? So you can check the existing permission as well and seeing whether it's blocked or not by the user. Then we can see within the web browser if they're supporting push messaging as a whole. And then as usual, you add some more code, then it just works, okay? It's that easy. So basically, you're having the push manager. You can make sure what kind of content you want to push, and also making sure with subscriptions if you want to push that sort of ongoing or a one-off, etc. And I was mentioning manifest files, and basically, if you have a website or a web page, you can have a manifest file that just describes that. It's good for being indexing search engines, but also mandatory for having things like offline apps and having push messaging in this sense. So you can just have, it's just like any app file, right? Describing your content. So you're having the name, descriptions, icons for different use cases, what URL you want them to start in and such. And kind of as an extension to that, naturally, with having mobile devices, we have people adding apps or shortcuts to the home screen. So one thing that we built into Chrome on mobile is app install banners. So we can see that if we have a user that keeps on going back to the same web page, it's not necessarily that we have to tell developers in every website, you need to add the button on your own, and it's going to look different in all the places, add to my home screen, etc. So we build it in, and it's based on a few things. So again, sort of back to the manifest file. You need to have the web app manifest file, you need to have the service worker, HTTPS, etc. But then we're trying to figure out, when do we sort of know that the user is showing intent that they seem to like this website? They keep going back all the time. Maybe they want to have a quick shortcut on the home screen. So basically, we can do things like we can see that they visited the site twice over 2 separate days, over 2 weeks, etc., combined with a lot of other different things. But just making sure that you don't annoy the user, but you rather ask them when it seems to bring them the most value. And all of these things that we're talking about leads to progressive apps. And progressive apps or progressive web apps are basically just making sure that we having websites or web apps that become sort of on, what should I say, they become available for the user and making it as smooth for the user as possible. So just using different technologies to make sure that you have a much, much better flow. And it's just a combination of all these different technologies, especially having service workers, push, etc. And basically, the idea with progressive web apps is to meet the things that I was describing before, like why are people building native apps? Well, for A, B, and C. Okay, how can we make sure that the web also offers that? So we can cater to all those needs, and that's the idea of progressive web apps. So we have lots of documentation on sort of getting started and how to think, and also similar to the web fundamentals, like, okay, so how do I build a progressive web app? How do I actually get it done, right? And combined with that, we also having part of the documentation, the web updates part. While you figure out all the new things that are being pushed out all the time that you can have as part of progressive web apps. So basically, just remember progressive web apps because that's where you're going to find all the documentation and also all the new features to making the web better and better for the users. I think one interesting thing as well, and looking at monetization, especially with native app stores, it's really easy because people have registered accounts, they have their credit cards in there, and you just keep on buying apps and Smurfberries or whatever you don't want. But it's easy, right? And I think, and not that I actually have a proper solution here, but I think on the web, sure, you have e-commerce websites, etc. But I think the way to monetize content needs to be a lot better on the web. I mean, right now, you're having a number of ads, and it works. I mean, look at Facebook, apparently it works. But still, we need to find other ways to make it easier for developers on sort of every level to actually make sure that they can make money on the web, whether that's sort of in web app contents or if it's subscriptions or something like that. But we're working on it at least. So the general question comes up. So what's sort of the future of the web? Is it just going to die? Has it had its good run and it's over, or what's going to happen? And I think the important thing is to figure out why we have the web to begin with, right? I mean, the web is the only platform that's going to work across so many different devices and also so many different versions. And it would be quite a shame to sort of just let that go, right? There's so many ways to make sure that it's still relevant. I mean, from our side, what we're building for developers to make it easier to build better and better web apps and websites. But also make sure that the web has a number of things that native doesn't have, right? And then you have both in Android and iOS, some things with deep linking and other things that's sort of emulating things that's been on the web for a long time. And at least from my point of view, I want to make sure that we have a technology that's more and more agnostic from the platform and actually works everywhere. And I think to some point, not that we have to, win over native. I think native and the web is going to coexist for a long, long time. Neither of them is going to go away. But in some cases, we need to use the web's potentials to its fullest, right? And also sort of its independence in general of different platforms. I think we need to get people back to sharing URLs again. I mean, as you saw before, like giving people long instructions of scanning codes and installing apps and readers, like it's ridiculous. Just give them a URL and then it should work for the users. Like it's up to us to make it as easy for the user as possible. And it's generally not that hard, right? Like it's all about impressions. I also think one thing, and then I was talking about the web fundamentals, is that right now, if you come to sort of front-end developing, the onboarding is way, way harder than before. The way it started was that we had HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? You can have any text editor, and it was really easy. Now it's fairly complex. You have a ton of different build scripts and solutions and package manager, etc. And they're all really good and powerful. but they're sort of powerful in the sense of Linux, right? You can do anything, but sometimes maybe you don't have to do everything, right? Sometimes you want to have a few things that work really well. So I think we need to figure out for the sort of broad range of developers how we can offer that to them. I think it's also up to us to actually show people all the things that the web can do, both on desktop, on mobile, when it comes to technologies and experiences, but also access to different content with all of these extra steps. Um, and finally, I think it's also the longevity of the web, where we can see that the things that we're building right now, it's going to work in 10 years, more or less. The things that we built 10 years ago, like my first website back in 97-ish, it still works, right? It looked like shit back then. It still looks like shit, but it's consistently shit, okay? And that's the important part. It's not like, no, you have the previous version of the operating system. You can't look at this at all. And I think that's terrible for us. I think it's terrible for mankind if everything we do is just, you know, it works now, but tomorrow it's going to be gone, right? There's lots of good content out there. We need to take care of it. But we need to make sure that it's unique. Like, we don't want the web to be yet another space movie with Matt Damon, right? It's the same guy in a different suit in every movie. So I think we need to make sure the web is also unique. We need to offer all of these different experiences. We need to make sure that the web is as diverse as possible. I don't know what this is. I don't know. And I'll end with a little anecdote. So I have two daughters, and when the oldest of them had a birthday a couple of years ago, and she had her birthday party, invited a lot of friends, and then, you know, they were having cake and all that, and then we gave them these letter cookies. So each cookie is a different letter, you know, the letter F, the letter M, etc. And we thought, because I think she was turning 7, like, you know, maybe they're going to spell something. Let's give it to them. So it took about 30 seconds, and this was the first word that we got, which is, of course, terrifying. Like, you're having the shining moment, and you need to talk to that girl's parents, etc. But at the same time, it's fantastic, right? Because no one would ever expect this. And this is sort of how I see the web. Like, we want to give you all the tools to build crazy shit. And some of it is going to be terrifying, and some of it's going to be amazing. But that's the nice part. We don't want everything to just be the same, right? Just create crazy shit and make it amazing. Thank you.